Okay, so thank you for attending the talk today. So this is about how Clinical Trials Unit, or I'll refer to them as CTUs from now on, can help support the delivery of research projects. So I'm going to use the USTEKID trial as an example of how CTUs have worked with trials and what services they can deliver. So the definition of a Clinical Trials Unit is they're a specialist unit set up with a specific remit to design, conduct, analyse and publish clinical trials and other well-designed studies. And that's what we tend to miss out in terms of people's conceptions of what a CTU will do. It's not just clinical trials. So you'll see as I go on in terms of the presentation, what else we can offer. So, first of all, you should be thinking, why do I need a CTU? And hopefully I'll convince you that there is a value to using our services. So there is a cost and benefit analysis to be done. Obviously, the cost is mostly staff costs. I mean, we do have a variety of staff and services that we can provide. So there is that side of it, but the benefits are the delegation of the workload. So you can decide what it is you want that CTU to do. You might want them to do everything. You might want them to just do database work for you. You've also got access to resources and expertise, which you may not otherwise have, and certainly in a timely manner as well. So some funders also require a UK CRC registered CTU as a collaborator. So if you've decided actually a CTU might be of interest to me, where do you find one? So this is a map taken for the UK CRC website, so that the link is in the bottom of the slide. And you can see that there are quite a few spread across the UK. I'm here to advocate for the 3 Welsh clinical trials units. So we have one in Cardiff, we have one in Bangor, and we have one in Swansea Trials Unit. Swansea, sorry. So because I'm from Swansea Trials Unit, I can speak with more confidence about the services we will deliver. But please bear in mind, other trials units can also do very similar, sometimes more, sometimes less services. So have a think about which CTU is the right one for you. So in terms of Swansea Trials Unit, or STU as we like to call ourselves, so these are the type of projects that we support. So we've got the clinical trials of investigational medicinal products, CTIMPs, so basically drugs trials. We're now looking at advanced therapy medicinal products, or for example, blood products in trials. We do surgical trials, device trials, and other randomized trials. We also do observational studies and qualitative studies. We do systematic literature reviews, and we've actually published 2 of those in the last, I think, 2 or 3 years. And we also have expertise in developing and validating PROMs and PREMs. So as I say, I've got this little caveat here. Everything I say, other CTUs will be very similar to the kind of services that we provide. So in terms of the actual services and the staff roles involved, we have people who can do trial or study management, data management, and also database support. We have our statisticians, we have health economists, we have qualitative support, we have systematic literature review support, and this one is probably of a lot of interest to people. We have bid support, so we can give advice on the methodology you might like to use, costing considerations. We can put you in touch with people who may be able to strengthen your bids. And it's not something that CTUs tend to be well known for, but please, certainly, whichever CTU you decide to work with, this sort of service should be on offer to some degree. So at STU, we also have what we call the PARC panel. So this is the way that we identify patient, carer and public representatives for bids. And if a project does get funded, they can also sit on the committees. And we offer regulatory and governance advice. And finally, the PROMs and PREMs expertise. So if anyone's interested in developing, say, a quality of life questionnaire, that's the kind of things that we can help with. So I'm now going to try and convince you why you might need a CTU and to have these staff to delegate these roles to. So you might be thinking, well, what do they do? You know, what do I get for my money? So this has been written based on what I do in a clinical trial, typically delegated by the chief investigator. So this is one sentence, and it is many, many weeks and months of work. It's hard to convey how much is actually involved in this, but it's basically developing and completing study documentation. So things like the protocol, patient information sheets, consent forms, risk assessments, manuals, lots of plans, lots of things going on. And typically the study manager is either the document owner of those documents or document controller. We submit documents for approvals, so that the burden of that is taken off the chief investigator, so we can do all your IRAs. If it's a CTIMP, we can go through CWOW for you. And as well as approvals, but I'm also thinking of amendments in this process. We can do site setup and training, and this again can be quite a burden in terms of getting site set up, liaising with the various departments, with the research nurses, your R&D department. And then actually, for me, I prefer to go to a site and actually do the training, because I think that face-to-face helps, certainly before and after the official training event, because you build a rapport with the people. So it does take a lot of time. There is also the option of online training. There is certainly a push for greener trials now and reducing our carbon footprint, but that again is something the study manager would coordinate for you. We help with contract negotiations. I mean, I would be the first to say I'm not legally qualified, but I understand the study. So the legal team will understand the legalities of what's required, but they won't know the study itself. So that's where I come in. So the study manager will also liaise with the funder, the sponsor, and any external vendors that you require for your study. We manage the sites. So in terms of the kind of studies I've done, so the recent one, the USTEKID one, has 16 sites. So that is no mean feat. So again, it's taken the burden away of the day-to-day emails that are involved in trying to get these people to do something that you ask, and be doing it in a timely manner. And then just the overall study management process. We manage the safety reporting process, again, very critical in terms of CTIMPs, in terms of the timing for that. So that is something we would take on. We coordinate your committee meetings, so be they trial team committee meetings, oversight committees, anything like that, that we would take on that responsibility. We will file the key documents in an audit-friendly document management system. So we are currently moving over to an electronic filing system. But your studies have to be audit ready at very short notice. So keeping your filing and doing it every other month is just not the way to do studies. So that is something we take on the management of. We assure that you're adhering to all adopted standard operating procedures and any other regulatory requirements. And we work with the other team members just to make sure staff tasks are being completed. So I kind of feel like I need to know what everyone's doing at every point in time and then planning what the next step is. So hopefully I've given you an idea of why a study manager might be an important thing for you to cost in terms of future funding. So something else that we often offer, and maybe in isolation and maybe not with the study manager, but we often require a data manager for bids. So we would offer up the person who can do the data collection forms. So they need to be developed. It's not as straightforward. These are the questions I want to ask. There's lots of back and forth with the chief investigator, with the statistician. It's very important that the data you are collecting is collected for the right reason in the right way for the statistician to analyse. So this is probably a bit more complicated than that sentence maybe conveys. The data manager will also develop and manage your database. So at Swansea Trials Unit, we do use REDCap. So other CTUs will use different or potentially REDCap software. You'd need to check with them what their database requirements are. Certainly in Swansea Trials Unit, we ask the data manager to manage the randomization system. So if it's a randomized trial, and this is a very time-consuming task. So it's the data checks and the queries that need to go back to research sites. So I think I cannot underemphasize the amount of time that this task takes. So well worth thinking about costing somebody in like this. They'll do the export of data for interim and final analyses. We tend to tie down who is allowed to export data because we don't want data going out without anyone knowing. There is an official process for exporting. And they work very closely with people like myself, trial and study managers. We also have an IT manager here, and he coordinates the database and the randomization system because we need IT accounts put in for them. Again, this would be the case for all CTUs, and it is important they are recognised when it comes to bids. And we also need the IT person to manage the actual amendments of databases. It's one step beyond what a data manager would do. Now, I've opted to pull together the 3 types of analysis we often see in studies. So I've got the statistician, the health economist, and the qualitative researcher all in one table. Hopefully this doesn't offend anyone, but they do so many of the same jobs. So they all advise on the aims, objectives, and outcomes. They all advise on the development of the data collection forms. They have their own plans that they are responsible for in terms of the data that they're collecting. They all assist in developing reports, analysing and reporting on the results. So for our statisticians, we would expect them to develop a randomisation specification for RCTs, and they would test those systems as well. And for our qualitative researchers, there would probably be an expectation they would conduct the interviews and focus groups if there was that requirement. Okay, something we do at Swansea and probably at other trials units, at other clinical trials units as well, is systematic literature reviews. So where we perform that task, we would advise on the protocol aims, objectives, and outcomes. We develop a literature search strategy with the person that we're working with. So quite often we'll work with a clinician who will have a far better understanding of maybe the keywords involved. We will then conduct that literature search, and we keep concise trackers of that literature being reviewed, and there are reasons for exclusions based on the ultimate aim of the project. So we keep all that so that we can map it out in a diagram. We are typically involved in the analysis of the final included papers, and we will contribute to the write-up of the review. Okay, trials units will also provide PPI reps, so these patient and public involvement representatives for your study, but also for any bids that you may have, because there is a strong push now on the patient perspective on funding applications. So as I've said, when we've got the co-development of bid applications, we also would really encourage that they are involved in protocol development. So it's important that the aims, objectives and outcomes are important to the patient or member of the public. It is something as well that the bid application should be aware of. Patient-facing documents, so they are so helpful when it comes to writing these, because they can point out what might be very obvious to us because we are professional to a certain degree. And they might say, no, I don't understand what that means, or maybe it's a bit complicated, maybe a picture would be better instead of words. So their input on these things is invaluable. They're also really helpful in collecting data and designing the data collection forms, so things like diaries and questionnaires. They can look at what we propose and say, actually, that's not clear, or they will test the completion of something and we will see if the instructions were followed correctly. They can help with the interview schedules. Maybe the wording of a question may not be clear, and they can help with explaining something to a patient, rewording the question. And they also help with the final report. So we would typically have things like lay summaries in reports, which we often ask our PPI reps to complete, and any other outputs. And I have also seen PPI reps present at conferences on behalf of trials. So we at STEW specifically have the PARC panel, so that's the Population Advice for Research Committee. So there are, I think at last count, there are about 20 people on that, and they have sort of signed up, ready to be contacted about bids. We're always looking for new members. There is a link at the bottom of the slide if anyone is interested, or maybe knows a family member who might be interested in joining this. And they can help us out in terms of bid development. And we often find as well, if somebody is in a bid, they then may accept the invite to be in the funded study, so in a committee of some sort. So in terms of bid support, we do have a way of helping people develop bids. So this is specifically to Swansea Trials Unit. The CTUs will have their own rules around how they support bids. So please contact them and ask them. So at STEW, we do design research proposals with the chief investigator leading the requirements. We can help with building an appropriate research team, and we can put you in touch with potential collaborators that you may not know about. We can certainly help you with a PPI for your bids, for example, using the PARC panel, or we can seek out new members if needs be. Costing advice, most definitely a critical part of bids and doing it properly, and we have in-house expertise on that. And we can help give advice on suitable funders. So what Swansea Trials Unit does not do is training. We don't support ongoing studies where we've had no prior involvement. So an example of this will be if somebody comes along with their data set and says, can you analyse this, please? And our statisticians will say, no. We need involvement at the start. We need a say in how it's designed, how the data is collected, and so on. So as a rule, we will not just pick up a complete data set and just analyse it. And we also don't do student projects as well. So this is a plug for Swansea Trials Unit. Just an idea of the kind of studies that we do. We see I've got the first 4 lines, they're all drugs trials that we do. I think the reason I put this up is to convey the different chief investigators and where they're from, different types of interventions that we've dealt with, different funding bodies, and I'm sure other CTUs will have a very similar portfolio. So in terms of our completed studies, these are the CTIMs we've had over the last few years. We've had some surgical trials completed, and I've just lumped these under other trials and studies. I've just gone for logos. There's more information on the Swansea Trials Unit website if you wanted to look up some of these studies. And finally, we've got other research. So Moondance and PASTA were both research programs that we were involved with. And as I mentioned earlier, we have published 2 systematic reviews in blunt chest trauma, and that was with Professor Kerry Battle. So just to give you an idea of how a CTU will act sort of in real life, as it were, I've taken the USTEKID trial, which I was the trial manager of, and I'm just going to try and bring in where the roles featured, just to give you an idea of what we can do. Okay, so USTEKID was a paediatric CTIMP. So it was led by Professor Colin Diane, who's based at Cardiff University. And the trial compared ustekinumab versus a placebo, which was saline, in children aged between 12 and 18 years old with new onset type 1 diabetes. And by new onset, that meant they had to be 100 days from the point of diagnosis to being in the trial. So we needed 72 participants, and the idea was we would recruit those over 2 years, and then COVID hit. I'll mention that briefly in a further slide. We did manage it in 2.5 years, I will say. We had the design of it was 2 screening visits, just because there was a lot to do, and there was the option to split the visit off. There were 7 dosing visits and 1 follow-up visit at 12 months. And we also built in the remote follow-up, which was 18 and 24 months. The trial was done in 16 hospitals across the UK. And we did a 2-to-1 randomization for this. So they were twice as likely, sorry, there was a 2-in-1 chance that they would get ustekinumab rather than the placebo. And this, I think, definitely encouraged people to be in the trial because they thought they had more chance of being in the intervention group. So there were blood and urine tests done, both at the hospitals and at the research labs that we had as collaborators in the trial. We used a macro database. Macro is sort of fallen out of favour these days, but this trial started back in 2018, and that was the only sort of the main trial database on the market at the time. More recently, more people have gone into REDCap, and we did use that for our surveys to do the follow-up. We used a website called Sealed Envelope Limited, and they provide a randomisation service, and they are quite well known, used by multiple CTUs across the UK. So in terms of the background for USTEKID, so type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition where the body attacks its own insulin-producing cells, so we call them beta cells in the pancreas. So insulin is the only treatment for this, but unfortunately almost 70% of type 1 diabetes patients still can't have satisfactory glycemic control. So what we found is most patients still have up to 20% of their beta cell function remaining at the point of diagnosis. So research is looking for a way to save those remaining beta cells. So Professor Diane postulated that ustekinumab, which is also known as Stelara, you can see it in the picture, is a possible treatment. So it's a monoclonal antibody licensed for UK use in the treatment of psoriasis and Crohn's, both of which are autoimmune conditions. So the hope was it might help in type 1 diabetes. So just recapping slightly, so we got the trial design, it was randomized, it was double blind, so the patients didn't know what they had and neither did the clinical team. It was placebo controlled, the placebo being a saline injection, and a phase 2 trial. We had 72 newly diagnosed patients aged between 12 and 18 across 16 sites in the UK. And bear in mind, the 12 to 18 age range, anything up to the point of the 12 to 15-year-olds, we have to have assent, not consent. So we have to involve the parents with this as well. So there were the complications of this being the paediatric trial when designing it. So the intervention was ustekinumab or a placebo, subcutaneously injected at 7 doses. So we had weeks 0 and 4 with the loading doses, and then they were every 8 weeks after that. And then at week 52, we were measuring the 2-hour insulin C-peptide area under the curve. And that was done as part of a mixed meal tolerance test. Okay, so just to talk a bit about randomization, the eligibility for this trial had to be confirmed prior to randomization and had to be done by a medic because it's a CTIMP. So we used Sealed Envelope, there's their website there, to provide a web-based randomization system. So this is really good because people can just log in, find the trial that they're assigned to and just conduct the randomization. Our statisticians designed the algorithms that we needed. So it was a 2-to-1 randomization, and we also required minimization by age group and baseline C-peptide to make sure there was a balance between the groups. So the way the system works is it sends out randomization emails, but it doesn't tell the person receiving the email what the treatment allocated was because it needs to be blinded. So what it does is it sends a code. So for example, the email will say, patient number 1 has been randomized to RG9, and only the pharmacy staff will have the code break list to know that RG9 is, for example, placebo. So that's how we keep everyone notified that a randomization has happened. The patient is going through in the process, but only the key people need to know what that treatment actually was. So in terms of the trials unit involvement, so it was my job to organise all the contracts and support the testing of this randomisation system. The statistician developed a specification and tested the system, and we had the data manager to manage the system. So 3 people involved here in just trying to get the randomisation system set up and running. And finally, and probably most importantly, the unblinded staff, because we needed somebody to provide pharmacy support, because I, as the trial manager, was blinded, as was the data manager and obviously the statistician. So we needed key staff involved in this process, and they had full access to the system, whereas I would have had restricted access. So again, it's something to factor in if you're designing a study. All of these staff are a requirement potentially. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but what I'm trying to convey here is, if you look at the left-hand column, all of the data that's been collected. So it is a summary. I mean, I put case report form completion. There were lots of forms within that booklet to complete. We had diaries, we had quality of life questionnaires, we had processes for blood samples being taken and analysed, we had dried blood spot cards, we had CGM, which is continuous glucose monitoring data, which was downloaded from devices that they would wear on their arms. So very data intense in terms of how much was collected and when it was collected. And you see, I've got in red there the mixed meal tolerance test. So that was our primary outcome measure. So we measured that at screening, and then at dose 5, which was basically halfway through treatment, and then week 52. Now, this slide is meant to convey the movement of information and data. So if I take you down to the bottom, which is where the STU logo is, and we've got the trial and data manager roles. So the blue arrows denote all of the contact we have, all of the management of various people, committees, organisations, and basically the trials unit in this instance for this trial did all of this work. So other trials may have different requirements, other CTUs may do things a slightly different way, but they're all basically along these lines. So we basically had trial and data management for all the organisations there. The sample movement, so that was blood and urine samples, were going from the 16 NHS sites across England, Wales and Scotland, and they moved to our 2 primary labs. So that was KCL and what was then known as the Diabetes Research Unit Cymru, or DRUC as we used to call them. And from there, further analysis would be done by our secondary laboratories. So that was sample movement from lab to lab, requiring material transfer agreements. And Sanguine is an independent company based in the Netherlands, so we had to facilitate the couriering of samples over there. And in all those instances with the labs and with the sealed envelope as well, there was data coming back into the trials unit, so that had to be managed as well. So if you want to know anything else about USTEKID, we did publish our protocol back in 2021. And I'm pleased to report we published our results this year. That was published in July in Nature Medicine, so we're very proud of that. And there are further publications on their way. So what I'm trying to convey in this slide is the timelines. I'm just the reality of how things actually work. So the funding was given by NIHR EME in late 2017. The trial actually started in terms of setup at Swansea Trials Unit in January 2018, and we started patient recruitment by the end of the year. We've got our last patient last visit, which ended up being August 2023, and we began trial closure processes in June 2024. So again, this is another reason for a CTU to be involved. This is a long time, it's a lot of work. One thing I would like to advocate for, which was in the USTEKID trial, and I can't claim the idea myself, but we had a recruitment video. So if you go into YouTube and you just put in USTEKID, you will find Jamie in the picture there. And he presented a short video, less than 5 minutes, and it was pitched at the children that we were looking to recruit. So these are 12 to 18-year-olds. And the feedback we got was that it was extremely helpful in just comprehending what was likely to be involved in the trial before they read what was for the parents, an 8-page information sheet. So I've taken a few screenshots here. So it was very well received. The sites loved it, and it was something I would definitely advocate for anyone thinking of doing research, especially if you're recruiting in vulnerable groups. It's a really good way of getting the message across. For anyone interested in the process of consent and randomization, so the dotted lines I've got here were our targets based on what we told the funder that we would do. The solid lines, so blue is consent and red is randomization. The reason there's a difference between consent and randomization is because it took a few weeks to go through the screening process. But you can see that the slope was fairly representative of the estimate. You'll notice this flattening out, and this was COVID. So we did have to unfortunately close to recruitment for 4 months. But we were very lucky with our patient group because being type 1 diabetics, they were used to doing subcutaneous injections of insulin. So we did get approval to send the blinded medication to patients' homes if they consented to this, and they were happy to dose themselves. So we had an unblinded research nurse who would video call them to watch it happen, just to make sure that there were no issues and to verify compliance. So thankfully, COVID didn't kill the trial, and we certainly learned from it, and we carried on, and we weren't too far behind the final recruitment target in terms of timing. Okay, so this is my 2D version of how everyone works together. Ideally, this would be 3D, if not 4D. Everyone works with every other member of staff, and this will be the same for every CTU. So what we have here, I mean, our unblinded staff, they organise the medication management, liaising with the company who were actually providing the ustekinumab for us. We had the unblinded statistician, who was also at the time based in Swansea Trials Unit, and he provided the unblinded reports for the oversight committees. Just to give a bit of information about the quality of life questionnaires that we used, and we have the expertise in-house in terms of analysing these. The statistician in this particular trial was provided by the Diabetes Research Group in Swansea, but she did sit with us. So typically we would have our own statistician used on trials. Our data manager, who built and managed the macro database, which was for the main trial, and built and managed the REDCap database, which did our follow-up data at the time. And he also managed the sealed envelope system. We can't forget SOPs and regulatory advice. I mean, this was invaluable when COVID hit, and we were kind of thinking, what do we do? If these patients can't continue treatment, the trial is dead. So that was a brilliant bit of support. And if you're wondering what the results were, so the participants given ustekinumab produced 49% more insulin in their bodies than those given the placebo. And also interesting was the fact that we proved ustekinumab was safe. There were no serious side effects reported. In fact, there was only one serious adverse event reported anyway, and we are fairly sure that it was an actual hypoglycemic event, which we would expect in diabetics. So the conclusion for that trial was ustekinumab did appear to slow the autoimmune process, but alone it was insufficient to halt it. So we are looking at combination therapy to maybe take that one forward. The final report to NIHR will be published imminently. I keep saying this every week, it is imminent. Just keep an eye out on the NIHR EME website or on the Journal Library, and it should be there soon. So finally, just to acknowledge in terms of the USTEKID trial, who we worked with. So we worked with a lot of people in Cardiff University. We worked with the Diabetes Research Unit Cymru, now called the Diabetes Research Group, and King's College London. So the last two were our two primary labs in terms of doing the analysis. And these are all the sites that we worked with, and we owe them a huge debt in terms of the amount of work they put in, especially over COVID. They really did not want to lose these patients, and they went above and beyond in terms of what they did for us. So a huge thank you to everyone. And thank you for listening.